First is storage, loading, and unloading of materials. Under Section 7A of the zoning amendment, Thayer Nursery must demonstrate that it is suitable, that it has suitable storage facilities on the subject property for the safe storage of non-perishables used in its business, including mulch, loam, stone dust, and gravel. And again, I recall Attorney Corcoran identifying the storage bins that were proposed. To clarify, though, the storage bins must be required in an area 40 feet from a lot line of the subject property so as to avoid any adverse impacts of dust, odors, noise to neighbors and neighboring residents. There must also show that it utilizes effective measures, including covering or enclosure of dusty or odorous materials, the use of safe, efficient, reasonable, quiet loading and unloading procedures, and buffering with vegetation and noise-reducing walls and fences. With respect to demonstrating its implementation of safe, efficient, and reasonably quiet loading and unloading procedures, there is nothing in the record that evidences that any of the measures proposed by Thayer will actually mitigate the noise generated or anticipated to be generated by its commercial activities. So what we're looking for is some sort of information that quantifies how the proposed mitigation measures will reduce the noise, dust, and odors that is anticipated to emanate from the subject property. Now, with regards to the storage of fertilizer, the zoning amendment requires that Thayer have suitable storage facilities for the safe storage of fertilizer, other chemical products, fuel, and oil used in the landscaping operations. However, this is actually a topic that is governed by the Massachusetts Board of Fire Prevention regulations. Those can be found at 527 CMR Section 1 at sequence. Accordingly, whether or not Thayer complies with provisions with this provision of the zoning amendment rests solely with the Milton Fire Department and the State Fire Marshal. The Planning Board is simply preempted from certifying that Thayer's complies with this portion of the zoning amendment. As such, it cannot issue a special permit to Thayer Nursery unless and until its application includes all necessary permits required under Massachusetts law for the safe storage of fertilizer, chemicals, fuel, and oil. Now, paragraph 7D of the zoning amendment, again, limits the numbers and types of vehicles that Thayer can use on the subject property to those used in July of 2012. As such, Thayer Nursery's application must provide the Planning Board with this historic information, i.e. that what vehicles were actually used on the property in July of 2012. I haven't seen any of that. I haven't seen that as part of their application. Without that information and evidence as to the impact of that number on abutters and nearby residents, there is no way for Thayer Nursery to make a reliable showing that a higher number of vehicle types in 2015 would have no adverse impact that would result in reduction in overall noise. This is required in paragraph 7D of the zoning amendment. Without such a showing, the Planning Board cannot approve Thayer Nursery's current application. Section 7E of the zoning amendment requires Thayer Nursery to show that there will be a safe and convenient movement of vehicles on the subject property. This also obligates Thayer Nursery to present enforceable procedures to the Planning Board that will govern trucks making deliveries to the subject property, the operation of vehicles and equipment on site, loading of materials and equipment, and trucks making off-site deliveries. Thayer's present application does not satisfy this requirement. Once again, Thayer's application provides only broad procedures for on-site traffic, loading, and deliveries. As stated above, Thayer Nursery must submit specific rules with respect to these matters, particularly where they affect noise levels and fumes for abutters and nearby neighbors. As such, the Planning Board should take no further action on Thayer's application unless and until it produces specific information that's required under this section of the zoning amendment. Now, with regards to outside truck traffic, paragraph 7E of the zoning amendment contemplates Thayer Nursery's receipt of truck deliveries and limits the hours when they can occur to weekdays between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Furthermore, This provision obligates Thayer Nursery to provide the planning board with a truck route which trucks shall use to make deliveries to the subject property during these designated hours. Implicit in this requirement is that Thayer's proposal for truck deliveries evidences that the health, safety, and welfare of Milton residents sharing the same narrow roadways is protected. This should, at the very least, require Thayer Nursery to submit a professional traffic study with its application, which explains the impact that the proposed truck deliveries will have on abutters and nearby residents, and sets forth a proposal to mitigate any adverse effects. None has been provided, and to my knowledge, none has ever been done. Accordingly, the board should take no further action on Thayer's application until it submits such a traffic study. Now, with regards to, this all leads to, again, creating specific plans, rules, and specifications that can be used as a baseline for both Thayer and for the neighbors to gauge compliance with whatever special permit is issued by this board. The zoning amendment mandates Thayer Nursery's compliance with each and every one of the requirements set forth in it. However, the only enforcement mechanism mentioned in it rests with the building commissioner, who is the only individual charged with authority to submit an application to the Board of Appeals seeking to revoke Thayer's special permit for noncompliance with the requirements of the zoning amendment. From there, it provides that the Board of Appeals can only revoke Thayer Nursery's special permit in the event of a material violation which Thayer Nursery has not promptly cured after receiving notice from the building commissioner. The zoning amendment does not specify what a material violation is. It does not specify how long Thayer has to cure the material violation. It does not specify when the building commissioner must submit an application to the Board of Appeals if it is not cured. Accordingly, the planning board, in considering Thayer's application and in drafting any decision on this matter, should specifically identify, to the best of its ability, what constitutes a material violation, and set definitive deadlines for when Thayer must cure the violation and when the building commissioner must submit an application to the Board of Appeals if it is not cured. In light of these shortcomings, and I understand, and Mr. Joenning and Mr. Rowe understand that this is a process, and that this is an opportunity for us to present our concerns to the board. In its current form, the planning board should take no further action on Thayer's request until the information that's been requested by Mr. Joenning and Mr. Rowe is submitted and evaluated by the board.
All right. Well, you have made a number of points, and I, personally agree with some of them. I haven't done a checklist, but I think that you make some good points, and I think that what we need to do is have the applicant respond to this listing. And you don't have to do it now. I mean, you can do it now if you're prepared to do so. But there are things like the vehicles in use in 2012, the level of operations in 2012, which we don't have information about. And I think, Mr. Dunn, that you've done a creditable job here of raising issues, and I think that the applicant has to look at these, and if they feel that they've satisfied them, because you're right, the zoning basically provides that the applicant is supposed to give these little plans on all these things, and that the board will read the plan, and once it determines each plan, each of these numbered plans that go from A4, I guess it would be 4C through S. A ton of plans that applicant, tell us what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and make it enforceable so we can attach it to our special permit. And you do the work. We don't have to write the plan ourselves. And I'm afraid that we're clearly going to have to get, if we're going to get enforceable measures, we're going to have to do some work's going to have to be done here in certain areas. I mean, certainly the applicant's application is better than it initially was, but it's far from perfect. So I think that we should get a response to this letter, because this is a thoughtful letter, and I think a thoughtful response will advance matters. Hang on.
I think I agree with everything you're saying, but as well, I think the response is just merely a response to the application under the bylaw anyway. I mean, these are the requirements that are set forth.
Well, admittedly, but respond to these, because at some point we're going to have to go through all these things and determine each one ourselves. And, you know, at the very least, we've got an issue here presented. If they think that the particular comment is not valid, they should say so, and say why. Because, you know, I mean, things like they weren't doing snow and ice removal operations in 2012. I mean, they either were or they weren't. But we've got an issue here, and we're going to have to make sure that we make a reliable determination on all these things. So we're going to want a response from the applicant, whether it's from you, Mr. Corcoran, or from the applicant, preferably from you, since Mr. Dunn would probably appreciate that. And do you have any comments about that procedure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate Mr. Dunn's thoughtful work. I wish I'd received it before the start of the hearing this evening, so that it would have been an opportunity to have responded or understood more fully the specifics of each of the items requested. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to respond in detail to each of the items tonight.
Well, I'd give it some thought and respond as you may, because we're going to have to deal with all these things, and certainly we want to know why the applicant feels like these issues are not issues. So
Again, I just think that not seeing Mr. Dunn's comments prior, he made some points that are beyond this, but I would just assess that, 90% of it's part of the article. Paragraph 4, A through S is pretty much his comments. with some additional points.
And I think the application intended to lay out in sort of easy to read format how the plan would respond to the requirements of the bylaw. The bylaw is very strict in terms of what it was required, and the intent of the application was to demonstrate how, and in each respect, the operations would comply. I understand some of the specific details. The question raised about those, I need to spend some time drilling back into what's in the plan, whether and how it's appropriate to provide additional information and or respond appropriately where we don't feel additional information would be necessary. So obviously, there's a fair amount of work went into this response. It's going to require a fair amount of work to respond to it fairly, and so what I would propose is to get something back to the board in advance of the hearing in 2 weeks that the board can review prior to. I will share a copy with Mr. Dunn in advance of that.
I'm sorry, what's going to happen in 2 weeks?
And, well, 2 weeks from now, we're back for
Right.
the continuation of the hearing.
Unless you want more time.
Well, I think at this point,
Might as well be here in 2
I'm not,
weeks and see how
I'm not
we're doing.
requesting more time, because I think between now and 2 weeks from now, we can answer a lot of the questions and concerns that have been
Right.
raised, either with some initial detail if necessary, or justification as to why we don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
So I think in 2 weeks, we can turn something around that will go a long way towards responding to the questions and concerns that are raised by Mr. Dunn. It would be helpful to understand if there are other specific issues and concerns that the board may have, so that we can respond as well, if there are other issues or details.
Well, we'll see what we can do. Let's hear from the,
Just last point, because it's
Yeah.
just the same topic we're kind of hashing through. It would be nice to just have, I don't see that you didn't address some of these things, but I mean, it would be nice to go through again, Section 4, A through S, and say, for instance, item G, parking plan, we consider drawing, and I can't see what that's identified as, X as,
Sure.
meeting the requirements of Section G, parking plan.
Kind of a checklist?
Kind of a checklist of where you think the items here are covered. Some of them are covered, but,
Yeah, I think a significant number of them are covered. The question raised with regard to the storage of the diesel fuel, that the state fire marshal was out today inspecting the installation and authorized the fire department to reissue the permit associated with that. He determined that it was safe, it operates cleanly, efficiently. Diesel fuel is in fact the same fuel that is used for home heating. It's simply a different color. They dye it a different color, red, so that if a trucking concern were using heating fuel to drive the trucks and they were testing it, they would determine that they were using illegal fuel because they didn't pay the fuel tax that's required under state and federal law. It is exactly the same fuel. It is low volatility, and it's been determined to that. But, some more detail may be appropriate. Certainly a copy of the permit that was reissued today would be helpful. So I think that a significant amount of the number of the questions are addressed fairly within the application. I would like to take the time to more specifically respond where, and if in fact I agree that additional information is necessary, we'll provide it. If not, I'll indicate why I think it's not. So,
And I think just to reiterate.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think just to reiterate, it would be very helpful to, I think what you're asking for is a response point by point, even if it's C-section, just so that we don't have to hunt around for it.
no, I agree with that. It would be helpful to.
so yeah, some of it's a
Simplify
simple
it.
statement.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
addressed on Plan X or Y. But I'm just thinking, and I'm not topping on parking plan, because I don't think that's the most significant issue going on here, but behind that, you might have something like how you come up with the 34 spots that are, I'm sure there's the highway transportation engineers have a thing that says, X business, whether it's a church or a restaurant, requires for so many square feet, you should have X amount of parking spots. Just where they came with. Just so that you
Yeah,
do
we
want.
came up with it based on what the town's zoning bylaws generally require for parking. And, maybe that needs to be more carefully allocated as to which uses are used for what, based on what square footage of
That
this
would be
building or
helpful. It is
that.
one of my questions,
Right.
so it would be helpful to understand that.
And one of my questions is on the hours, so I would take another look at the hours as laid out in the actual zoning, as opposed to the hours that are laid out in the application. I would take a very careful look at those.
I tried to be pretty careful in that regard, but if there's some discrepancies in there, obviously the zoning bylaw it has to be complied with, so there was no intent to do something more than what we wrote. allowed. I know that we fought hard over what those hours should be
Yeah.
when the zoning bylaw was drafted and enacted.
We don't presently have any information on the 2012 levels, do we, as far as
You may not. and
limits of
yeah.
operation time, limits of number of vehicles, that type of thing?
Ed?
Mr. Chairman, recently, just the past 4 or 5 days ago, I had a chance meeting with the building inspector, who's also a friend. I was upstairs. And he said he wishes to come before the board to discuss his visitation potential at the site. I'm just wondering whether perhaps Bill should just talk to him, see if it would be good for him to come at the next meeting, Bill, or in the future, but I'd leave it to your discussion how to go about it.
I'll ask.
Okay, thank you.
My only concern about that, and the board can certainly request it, is that I think he's going to discuss issues that have been ongoing with what's happening under current permits. I think it's irrelevant to what is going to be ultimately permitted in accordance with the bylaw. The bylaw expands what allows a reintroduction of uses that are beyond what are currently allowed in the special permits that were issued by the Board of Appeals. And his obligation today is to determine whether and how they're operating in accordance with those permits. That would my precaution on that would be, what would be the purpose beyond talking about whether or not they've been in compliance and how many complaints they've received, he's received, and having to, how many inspections he's had based on, whether or not the current operations comply or have complied with the determinations of the Board of Appeals. I think it's a completely separate matter, and I would caution the board on that.
Just asking you, Alex, the article requires that they have that special permit in place before we look at the special permit to reintroduce the landscape business.
What? No, it doesn't. It simply says if they had a special
Nursery business
permit
in
at one
place.
point. That's just a initial step. They have to,
They have to have a permit for the nursery business in place.
something like, yeah, but they do.
And the fact that whether it's in good standing or not, or I know that's not a legal terminology,
It
but
basically, they're supposed to have some sort of a permit that they've been operating under, and whether or not it's in good standing or not, as I remember it, let me take a look.
it's section 37D, the greenhouse and nursery.
37D. Paragraph 3?
Right, I got the enlargement of the page here if you want.
Oh. You're talking about the zoning.
The existing.
Right.
The
Right,
new article references section 3A, 4, and 6, and 6 goes further to
They can have a
reference 7.
special permit, they probably do have a special permit for a nursery.
That's what I'm saying, this new article says that they have to have that in place in order to apply for this article.
Yes. All right, okay, yes, it does.
And so if it's,
But I think they do. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, in response to my friend Mr. Cochran's remarks, I know what Mr. Cochran wants to come, Mr. Prondak, why he wants to come here. But I just think if we have Bill talk to him, and Bill can talk to you, I think you might agree that it is an appropriate time for him to come before the board. Thank you.
Well, I mean, we can always limit what he has to say. I mean, he's made lots of observations of the particular site. So, you can invite the building inspector, Bill. That would be fine. And the board can ask him questions.
Shall we continue
Further
with the public?
public,
What?
Shall we
further
continue with
public
the public?
discussion?
Oh, well,
only heard
yes,
from one so
we've
far.
got, I think that Ms. Oldfield has something to say here. No, you're just here to, because you needed a writing surface? Because Mr. Johanning had his hand up.
I think we should,
Yeah, he can speak for now. Thank you.
All right. Who would like to be heard on this? Yes, ma'am.
Just make sure you have the mic.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Pamela Lepore, and I have lived at 44 Forest Street for 33 years. I'm the largest abutter of Thayer Nursery on the south side of the property. I first of all want to inform the newer residents of the neighborhood and the town that John Rowe and Phil Johanning are not alone with their grievances with Thayer Nursery. Abutters as far back as the 1960s have filed complaints with the building inspector and the Board of Appeals regarding excessive noise, dust, and odors, which are a violation to the special permit allowing Thayer Nursery to operate in our residential neighborhood. The Ratekis before John and Phil, the Pillsburys before Melissa Walter, the Tevens, the Davis Aaron family, along with myself, have appeared before the board many times over the past decades citing these violations. I'd really like to know how much the taxpayers of Milton have paid in legal fees for Thayer Nursery's violations. I'm sure that it's substantial. As a residentially zoned district, a special permit was issued to Thayer Nursery to protect neighbors and the residential nature of the area. The landscape portion of the business was allowed only as an accessory use. It is grown without approval to a large commercial industrial enterprise, causing distress and hardship to abutters. Thayer Nursery now wants another special permit to allow them to operate this business, but records show, just ask the Board of Appeals and Joe Prondak, they do not abide by restrictions. Just last month, Mr. Prondak visited the nursery to find an artisan shop, a direct violation of the Board of Appeals orders. The first page of their application seeks to reinforce the landscaping business, but on page 3, it mentions seasonal farmers and artisans markets. This is not landscaping. The town of Milton, along with other towns such as Quincy, Braintree, and Hingham, hold farmers markets in commercial areas, not in residential neighborhoods. They should not be allowed in residentially zoned districts. I think the Lower Mills Farmers Market seems to be filling this need just fine. So a retail, jewelry, and accessory store should not be allowed either. The entire land care yard operation, in other words, all of the commercial, industrial operations, are sited along my property. The landscape plan also shows the traffic pattern of this heavy commercial equipment circling around and along my property line. The noise, exhaust, fumes, and constant shaking from this will be devastating to my property, my home, and my peace. All of the loading and offloading of trucks and equipment is proposed for this area as well. I should not be forced to bear the burden of any part of this operation. This activity shouldn't be a burden of any abutter and should be centrally located on the nursery property. There's an area right next to the barn behind the main house that would be away from abutters, or the 2 acres behind 237 Hillside Street. There's nearly 2 acres back there that could accommodate this with a large buffer area. The landscape plan on page 5 proposes an 8-foot fence from Forest Street ending at the corner of the wood barn. The average height of a dump truck is 10 to 12 feet, and 18-wheel trucks are 13.5 feet in height. I'm not a landscape architect, but common sense tells me that an 8-foot fence will not obstruct noise or fumes or exhaust from trucks 10 to 13 feet high. And I don't understand why the fence ends at the corner of the barn when trucks will be going back there anyway. A 12-foot fence should be installed the entire length of the property. I know that wind has been mentioned as a concern, but proper installation will prevent that damage. The wood barn, fuel station, and tool shop are another source of noise and fumes and are along my property line as well. And then the lighting plan indicates lights as high as 25 feet. They should be no higher than 15. The existing floodlight on the southern side of the garden center shines onto my property and has for a lot of years. And again, the list of vehicles, what type of vehicles, how many are allowed. The plan shows spaces for 14. That sounds excessive. There should be a limit to the trucks and type of equipment allowed. And the setback for parking and storing these vehicles should be at least 50 feet from abutters to prevent fumes from contaminating their property. There are quiet bobcats on the market, and to be honest, for me, this is the main source of noise that fills my yard most of the year, especially during the summer. If the nursery would replace existing machines with quiet ones, it would alleviate a majority of problems. The proposed special permit at hand shows total disregard to me, my family, and home. No one would want this kind of industrial commercial activity in their backyard, and not one of the nursery supporters I have spoken to are a direct abutter. I would like to express one more thing, and that is how saddened I am how this dreadful ordeal has divided what was once a peaceful community. As a co-founder of the Hillside Neighborhood Association and treasurer for 18 years, I dedicated many years to protecting our beautiful, fragile, and historic neighborhood. Friends that I have known for over 30 years and other neighbors have said unkind things about the abutters, especially John and Phil, when not one of them has called to ask how this has affected us. Sadly, Maggie or Josh, neither one of them have ever called me to discuss my concerns. We are not trying to put their nursery out of business, but we are trying to protect our homes and live in peace. Thank you.
All right, who else would like to be heard?
Hello, my name is Bridget Waldbaum. I'm a resident at 94 Parkwood Drive. I am not a direct abutter of their nursery, but I am a neighbor and a friend of theirs. And when I walked in the room earlier this evening, a topic of a bed and breakfast was being discussed. And a quick note went by, and it was very funny, about how when an owner is resident, it's somehow a better operation. They have ownership in the operation, and they want it to be a good component of a neighborhood. Josh and Maggie are resident owners. They live in our neighborhood, and they run this business as a family. And I'm really excited that we're at this point right now, because there's a whole new permitting process that's just come on board, and their nursery is going to be the first applicant. I'm a little bummed out that we didn't have ducks in a row, but this is where we work out the process. I urge you to definitely let Josh and Maggie and their team know which ducks have to be in a row, article something, something through something, and let's get through this. Let's get them permitted to run this business with firewood, with landscaping, because I'm not that experienced a person, but I do think that landscaping, which is a summer thing, is congruent with snow removal, which is a winter thing. So I think those are a good partnership, and they always have been. And our records may indicate when we go back that they did run that in 2012. I'm sure you guys will pay close attention to that. I'm really excited because you guys are very sharp. Here's a new rule on the books. There is applying for a special permit. Neighbors have definitely helped elucidate all these points that need to be addressed: sights, sounds, traffic. I think there has done an exemplary job of acknowledging problems that have happened in the past. Let's stop and move forward. They've invested money to stay here in the community. I'd like them to be able to bring their Canton operations, bring their Canton operations back to home base and use that money to put in that fence. They've already done some drainage work, I guess. There were great pictures. Love the cutaway view of the pit. Let's permit them after they've addressed the specific articles, and let's let them start making those changes. Let's let them start implementing the right lighting, the sprinkler systems, the stalls for the materials, the firewood. And yes, let's figure out how many times the trucks can come through. Let's make sure the trucking companies know that they can only come in after a certain time so that they're not parked on some side road. And I do have to say that there's many times in our neighborhood that, like, if you have a big party, you've got to park on the street. And if you want to really have a great party, you might have a loudspeaker. So I trust my neighbors Maggie and Josh and their nursery as an entity. I even trust the people that work for them to be considerate, follow the rules as they're established. They're going to be accountable. I believe they're going to be accountable going forward, and the special permitting process will require them to show up and be accountable. And I know that my neighbors will definitely help us keep them to the letter and the spirit of these rules to control their impact on our neighborhood. But let's not forget that their impact on our neighborhood is pretty phenomenal. Even through all this struggle and stress, they're still responding in a way that's going to address our neighbors' concerns and bring their business to the next level, which will help them succeed in the long run. So I urge you, please, you guys have been really patient and you've come a long way through this process. Let's get on board here and figure out what their needs in order to get their permit through that process so that they can go ahead and implement those changes and address our needs so we can move on to new things. But you'll be back because that's what the permitting process is. They'll be back. Do you have any questions? There was no data in there, just opinion. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Who else? You'll be next.
Oh, sorry, forgive me.
Let's be relatively quick, though.
Hi, Derek Shuttle, 27 Forest Street, direct to butter. First, I think it's been several months since I've been able to sit in front of the board, so thanks for doing this work on behalf of the town, the neighborhood. And first to the neighborhood that we're in. I've been in Milton 13 years and in this neighborhood 8 years. And I never like to hear about neighbors where division is occurring or there's challenges. It happens, but the one thing I know, and I saw it yesterday, Sunday when I was over at Thayer, just looking around and seeing some of the improvements that have been made in order to address some of these problems. And I was pretty impressed with the amount of change that's taken place since the summer. We have 4 young kids. We have parties periodically. I'd like to think we're not that loud, but what I notice about the neighborhood is we've got 2 new houses going up, trucks all over the place. So I always caution folks to think, be sure the trucks that you think you're hearing are actually associated with Thayer and not the 2 houses that are going up. I think actually 3 houses going up. And in talking to Josh and Maggie and looking at this and understanding the stress it's put on them and their business is non-trivial. And I actually applaud the effort they've put forth to try and comply. It's a tough situation, but as an abutter and as someone that again has young kids that are running around these streets, my concern is not their trucks. If I were if I don't even know if this is the right audience, but I'd be more focused on the houses that are going up and the trucks that are driving around steady state all the time, who have no care for the neighborhood whatsoever, and really don't care about the landscaping. I'm just put money in on the sidewalk they drove right over, actually parked on it. Not the appropriate topic here, but point being, I think Thayer is a neighbor, not a business. They've been in this neighborhood quite a long time, not much longer than 8 years I've been here, and very much view them, yes, as a business, but as a neighbor first. They know the names of my kids. They spend a lot of time thinking about what it's like to grow up in this neighborhood and want it to be a good experience. And I do believe that the effort and time they're putting in to comply with the special permitting process is admirable and collaborative, I think. But wanted my voice to be heard and appreciate the effort that this board's putting forth to get to the right answer. It seems like this is quite an odyssey, and much like the last speaker, I would hope we'd get to a place where normal operations could presume. Normal operations could kind of step forward so observation could take place and see if they can comply. And I think then it is up to them to show the neighbors, the direct abutters, the folks that are really invested in this, that they can be good neighbors, not just a business, but be good neighbors, which I think ultimately this is all about that, right? So with that, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Yes, sir.
Mine is just a question. The public, well, I'm not going to say, will we be allowed to speak after we see the response from the
Yes,
Oakville?
the hearing is going to be, will resume. What time are we resuming on the 22nd, Bill?
I'm sorry?
What time are we resuming on the 22nd? 6:45?
Falcone's at 6:45, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, so
6:45?
7:15.
7:15.
Well, you've got Falcone at 6:45,
Oh, and Falcone may take some time.
which is why I said 7:15.
Well, maybe it should be
And open it
7:30.
at 7:15. Well, if you finish Falcone quickly, if you don't, you can open at 7:15 and continue until thereafter, or at least make mention that you will.
All right.
I just want to make sure that I can.
You
have
can,
the
yeah,
right to speak
we'll
next time.
definitely,
Because I want to hear the other
Right.
side and the response to it. I couldn't intelligently speak this evening based on not having seen the agenda that was posed by Mr. Dunn. No, my name is Dr. Dunn. We're not related at all. I just want to make that clear because I'm on the opposite side.
all right. Who else? Anyone tonight? That's fine. I do have a couple of things that you, yes, sir. Yes, of course you can.
Thank you. John Rowe, 23 Parkwood Drive. I would just like to say that one of my biggest concerns is compliance with any permit that has ever been issued to Thayer and any permit that may be issued in the future. Thayer Nursery has been under cease and desist from their landscaping operations since September 23rd, 2013, and from the wood business since February of 2014. They have not complied with those cease and desist orders, and I think what I'd like to present as part of the record, the town of Milton took Thayer Nursery to Norfolk Superior Court to get an injunction demanding that they comply with the cease and desist order that the ZBA issued in September 2013. The cease and desist order that was issued by Norfolk Superior Court, Judge Wilson, was in June of 2014. And as late as, or as recent as December 4th of 2014, they were found to be in noncompliance again by the building commissioner, and I'd like to submit this letter as part of the hearing. I'm not sure that there's any way that Thayer will ever comply with anything the town asks them to do, because in the past they never have. And I don't see how there's any provision in the zoning, or, you know, it should have the flexibility for you to put provisions in that have stiff penalties for noncompliance. And by stiff, I mean the permit should be revoked permanently if there are any violations. We have a history, and it's proven. It's been to the courts. It's been to Norfolk Superior Court. They've issued a cease and desist injunction, and it continues. The building commissioner, as I said, is, as recent as December of 2014, sent them another letter. I don't know how this body could issue a special permit to an organization who has time after time after time disregarded every permit or many of the conditions that the town has put in the permits that have been issued to them. Why would anyone expect them to comply with anything that's issued by this body? If you do, I just don't believe a permit should be issued at all simply because of their past behavior and the problems it's caused the town and the neighborhood. So I just hope you take that into consideration. It just seems to me that by issuing a permit, we're rewarding bad behavior. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Bill Johanning, 23 Parkwood Drive. Just to wrap up with what John said, Mr. Corcoran, when he first introduced this whole plan, stated that the Oldfields had not been good neighbors. And I think, expanding on what Pam Lepori just said, the Oldfields have never come to us and asked how we could work together to improve the situation. And Pam Lepori stated that they'd never come to her. So if we want to talk about neighbors and being good neighbors, it might start with some collaboration, which has never occurred. So when people, other neighbors, look at the situation and they say, that we have caused problems or whatever, John and I, and maybe Pam, and maybe the Rutekis, and maybe the Tevens, and maybe the Coles, maybe they might start by wondering who talks to us and when do they talk to us and when do they find out what kinds of problems occur in our lives because of them and say, how could we get together and resolve these situations short of coming before a town board? And as that has never occurred, and as Mr. Corcoran has admitted that they hadn't been good neighbors, I think we see right away that it's basic consideration for the neighbor that is causing the problem. And not John, and not me, and not Pam, and not Rob, and not Ellen, and not Chris, and not Tina. It's getting together, talking, working things out, but I think that ship has sailed. And Mr. Corcoran stated that they had not been good neighbors. That came from their attorney. What can I say? Thank you.
All right, anyone else at this point? If not, I do have a few things that we might, would be useful to have.
If I may, I just want to briefly respond to a couple of those last comments. The comments that we just heard have been comments that we've heard for the last year in front of this board, in front of the warrant committee, in front of town meeting. Town meeting trusts overwhelmingly their nursery's ability to perform in accordance with a special permit that would be granted by this board. I think they voted something like 1,000 to 3 to support the enactment of this bylaw. That's a little facetious. I think 3 people voted in opposition to the amendment to the bylaw. I was shocked that there was not a standing vote that night. It's been generally very difficult to achieve a 2/3 vote on a controversial matter. Town meeting voted, and there was no standing vote. It was overwhelming, the support of the town and the trust that the town has in the Oldfields' ability to operate under a permit in this regard. I think a substantial part of the issues over time have dealt with whether or not prior permits are issued were were general in nature, specific in nature, how they were violated, whether they were violated. There's been back and forth, litigation, hearings with the Board of Appeals. There's a whole history of difficulty, and it's a he said, she said, disagreement here, disagreement there. I think a lot of that is history. I understand that bad history is difficult to overcome, and better communication certainly is always an important consideration. But I think it's clear that the action that the town meeting took in the spring and the effort that the board put together to draft this bylaw, that there's a significant amount of trust in their ability to move forward under a new permit that would be specifically detailed and specifically identify. We do have some work to do. We will respond accordingly. And so I just wanted to set that record clear because there's a little bit of piling on that goes on from time to time, and I don't think it's appropriate.
All right. A couple of things. You have parking spaces in front of the wood barn, and yet this is, and your parking spaces in your loading area where you're going to have trucks when they're not in use. And parking trucks in where you're going to be proposing to do your operations, it's going to not be effective. You can't park your trucks there if that's where you're going to do all your business in here. And if the trucks are going to go around like this, these spaces in front of the wood barn would seem to me to be an obstruction also.
I think we can provide a better description of how and when those spaces will be utilized, under what purpose, how they'll be shared for varying uses, and why there will not be the type of concerns that the questions that you're raising, I think are legitimate, but we can respond.
It just seems to me that your parking plan is, I mean, you say that you've got enough parking spaces for your visitors, which of course, your customers, which you often do, but you sometimes don't. I mean, there was this last season, there was an event, I guess, but the entire intersection was filled with cars parked on the street, and it was, you never could have gotten a fire engine through there. So I do have a question about the parking. You say that you're going to fix your trucks in the wood barn, but what happens if it's full of wood? Your 150 cords of wood, where are you going to fix them then? And these are issues that occur to me, but you are proposing to bring in these huge 18, 20-wheelers full of wood, put it into the wood barn, and then use bobcats to load it into dump trucks and take it off-site. And this, you know, it has nothing to do with landscaping. It's a purely commercial activity, and it just adds tremendously to the traffic on the streets, which are not designed for 18-wheelers. In fact, it may be that you have more 18-wheelers delivering wood than you have 18-wheelers delivering nursery products. And I just wonder whether or not conducting the wood operation in that location with that sort of infrastructure is, you know, it is necessary. I mean, if it's necessary, if you can't stay in business because you need this revenue, I guess that's one reason, necessity. But it would seem to me that having a good infrastructure would be useful.
So what, in your opinion, what's good infrastructure? That's a little too vague, to use your words, you like specificity.
What?
So what is good infrastructure? What's the definition?
Well,
What would you like
Route
to
138 would be good.
Can I
it is
Say
a,
something?
What?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think what Alex is getting at is the infrastructure is the roads. And the roads are not really built to support tractor trailers.
I would suggest that the roads are public ways. They're built to support all sorts of tractor trailers and other vehicles that are delivering.
They don't stay on the road, however.
They come in and
even
they
though
come
it is a
out.
public
They
road.
come in and they come out and they go, and they happen periodically. We'll provide a more detailed analysis of how many on a daily or weekly basis, what times they arrive, how they arrive, what the route they will arrive. It's done, it's safe, it's been done for years. It has not been a big issue.
You will tell us what you've done in 2012.
Right, and in 2012, there was a vigorous wood
But
business.
saying it's a public street begs the issue. I mean, there are lots of country streets which do not support large commercial operations. But if there are no large commercial operations on the country streets, then they don't have to support that traffic. And to say it's a public street and they must support the traffic, whatever the consequences, I don't know if I agree with that.
Well, I think town meeting does, and town meeting certainly voted to
I
authorize
don't think.
under the bylaw
I
that
think they said there could be a wood operation if the planning board
if,
found that it had no adverse effects.
and if there was such a business in existence in 2012 at certain levels, it could be reintroduced at those levels.
If you say that a town meeting demanded that we authorize a wood operation, I think that you're just plain wrong. And I actually have some acquaintance with the zoning and know that it is entirely permissive upon a showing that it can be done without adverse impact to the neighborhood. So, the other thing that I did notice was that the zoning provides for Christmas trees and holiday materials. And holiday materials has become giftware in your application. And I think we were, when I wrote it, we were referring to wreaths and that sort of greenery that you would use rather than an assortment of gifts that you could give on the holidays. I don't think that I don't think that we ever intended there to be a retail operation selling general merchandise suitable for giving was ever intended. And I don't think that we probably have that ability to do that. So those are a few thoughts.
Can I bring up something else that's fairly similar? So we've asked that that you tell us what business activities are on the site, which you've done. But in introducing that, and this is page 9I, list of business activities, it says Thayer Nursery has been an agribusiness consisting of multiple interests. The following list sets out the business activities for which Thayer seeks a special permit. And the first one is nursery. And I want to call your attention under the language of the zoning to one purpose. The first sentence begins, the purpose of the subsection is to permit the ongoing operations of landscaping businesses. And then 2 is definition of landscaping business permissible activities. Nursery is not a permissible activity under the definition of landscaping business. Nursery is a permissible activity under the Board of Appeals permit, but you're not seeking a special permit for the nursery activities, because it's not listed as something we can grant a special permit for.
Well, that makes it a lot easier for us then, because my understanding, at least of where Alex sits, is that all of this is now wrapped into this new permit. And that it's
Firewood is, Christmas trees and other holiday materials is, and that's actually rather interesting because Christmas trees and boughs, holly, and wreaths grown or fabricated elsewhere, I'm obviously quoting, is listed in section 3A7D.
And they
So
fall
actually,
under
your
the-
Christmas trees and other holiday materials are now covered by both permits.
Correct.
But the nursery operations are not. You have to tell us that the landscaping services under 3, they exist on a lot with other uses, including agriculture, greenhouse, nursery, and/or residential. We obviously need to know how the uses are coexisting with each other, but you're not asking for a special permit. My reading of this for the nursery business.
I may agree that they don't have to provide, we may or may not have to provide it under the special permit. I just question if the zoning amendment requires them to identify their business activities
I have no problem
on
with
site.
identifying the business activities. In fact, they should, and
think
they
they
should
need
probably
to.
have the agricultural as
Right,
well.
I agree.
I'm just saying they can't say they're seeking a special
Understood.
permit
Just
for the
wanted to make
nursery.
sure we were on
Yeah,
the
no,
same
no, no.
page.
You have to list all your business activities. It's just that initial thing that says we're seeking a special permit for all of these. You're not seeking the special permit for the stuff that the zoning says we don't have authority over. So, reorganize
Accept
that.
A couple of points just that I'd like to ask you to think about or address when you come back with your responses. One is something that was raised and that I had a question about, which is the non-contiguous nature or non-continuous nature of the fence. Just an explanation for it would be helpful. On lighting, I think there's a photometric plan included, and that's helpful. I would like to understand if there's it seems that there's a continuous concern coming out of the neighborhood about lights shining into properties. So I'm not sure if that's being captured by the photometric plan, if there's a way to diffuse or screen that lighting so that it's not going, they're not having to look at the glaring lights onto the property even. That wouldn't be reflected on the photometric plan. I have similar questions about the parking. I think I've already mentioned that. I note a request for a 12-foot fence along the Lepori property line. Would like to just have you respond to that. There was also a mention of state-of-the-art equipment. Perhaps there could be just an explanation of when you give us your vehicle list, if you could tell us what year they are, when they're scheduled for replacement, something along those lines, just to give us some feeling on that. And then I would like to just hear at the next hearing just some thoughts from the applicant on compliance, just from the standpoint that, as Mr. Corcoran did start this whole process sort of acknowledging a bad history, I'm not sure we need to dwell on the history, but it would be interesting to hear how the applicant thinks we could put some language in here to help us or help our town with compliance issues. We may not take your advice, but I'd be interested in hearing just what your thoughts are as far as what that stick could be.
And along with that, just a few more things. I already mentioned the hours. I've gone through and made a chart, so you want to double check your hours and make sure that what you've proposed is absolutely consistent with the zoning. There's a couple of other specific requirements in there, some of which are on the plan, but you may want to consider a narrative to make it easier to check. Things like fences and walls have to be at least 15 feet from the lot line. You've shown that on the plan. Landscaping on either side of the fences. I think on the plan, at least in some parts, you're showing it just on one side. So where there's a specific requirement, just make sure that that is addressed, and people reviewing it can easily find that, how you have addressed the specific requirement.
We're going to need a plan of the other lot also.
Yeah, there is I think that was included, but we'll resubmit.
It wasn't in the,
Yeah, I didn't see it.
in any event, if you submitted it, all we need is a copy of it. We didn't get it. On the drainage, it seems to me that the only question I have is if you use a lot of fertilizer and all this stuff is nitrogen loaded that's being funneled into the town system, I would want to know more about that. Because the zoning does say that it will be kept on site if possible. So
Right. Yep.
it may have to be, well,
Excuse me, Alex, is it a nitrogen or a phosphorus problem?
I don't know, it might be both.
I think it's a phosphorus problem.
A phosphorus problem. Could be both, I guess, I don't know.
And is
But
it
I'd
what
like to
we're
know.
applying to the plant material, or is it the actual storage of bagged material?
It's not the storage, it's you're running, I mean, you're growing stuff. I assume you fertilize the stuff you're growing, and when the water comes through,
So
it
just a
probably
list
picks
of-
it up.
Just a list of our fertilizer we use.
Know that it's not going into the town's stormwater drainage system.
No, I mean,
There's
if
no
you
runoff
give in
into there.
Well, I think that
fertilizer
if
loaded.
we're spreading it in the growing area, then that's a nursery
That's a nursery
Right.
activity.
issue.
It's not that, it's, is it leaching into the town's stormwater drainage system? We've got stormwater drainage requirements, we passed zoning bylaw,
Yeah, and I
I don't
think-
know how many
but-
years
but
ago, but
that's-
how does, if
but
the
that deals with the-
fertilizer's overrunning that?
Okay,
Is
that-
that what you're asking? Is it,
Well,
if there's
no,
too
I
much
think that's an
phosphate
issue.
or whatever it is
It
going
seems
in?
to
I
me
think
that-
that is as much an issue for Joe Lynch and John Thompson and
Right.
and the engineering department, because they're the ones that issue that permit. They issue the permit to tie into the drain system.
But we'd
so we have to
we'd
satisfy
like them to address this.
Or to see the permit.
Right,
Yeah, make reference to that.
right.
Permit.
And because if the runoff is loaded with fertilizer, then it needs to be, measures need to be taken before it gets put into the town system.
And if that's all taken care of in the permit, then we just need to know that.
Exactly.
We just need to see it.
Yeah.
There is no large-scale storage of fertilizer. It's all in bags. Even the fertilizer used to do the landscape businesses comes in bags. 60 pound,
40, 50.
40.
All right. I think that we've managed to achieve the 9 o'clock cutoff that we were hoping for, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to continue.
Second.
Yeah, you've got a
do that.
question?
No, a motion to continue the hearing.
Continue the hearing to 7:15.
No, we've already continued the hearing. Okay, we're continuing the hearing until the 8th at 7:15. And now we have,
22nd.
what?
It is the 8th, it's the
Until the
22nd.
22nd.
We're not staying.
at 7:15.